Teaching students estimation and rounding for a practical purpose is very important in the elementary years. We will also get, of course, to the mathematical ways to estimate and round. But starting off, we want them to understand why this skill is important. We want it to have a purpose. How would you explain what estimating and rounding is to elementary students, and what kind of examples would you use? Pause the video and see what you think is important. I think for me, the main thing that needs to be taught at the elementary level is helping students see that rounding and estimating really is considering a halfway point. It's talking about something being closer to this or closer to that. And we can do that with all kinds of different things. We can talk about whole numbers, fractions, decimals. We can talk outside of math about distance. We need them to understand that everything boils down to that halfway point. We need to not teach them procedures where they're just looking at a number and then saying, look at the number next to it, and here's what I have to do. We need them to think about halfway. Look at the things I have written here, the numbers and the place I want you to round them to. What kind of language would you use to model this for students? And what would you expect them to say if they were explaining their thinking to you? Pause the video and see what you think. If I were modeling this for students and I were going to round this number to the nearest 10, I would have to think, what's half of 10? This is the number that's in the tens place, the 2, and half of 10 is 5. So do I have more than 5 ones? If so, I'm closer to the next 10. So what I'm thinking is 20 is a 10, 30 is a 10. I want to know if I'm closer to this one or this one. 5 ones is the halfway point. I have 8 ones, so I am closer to 30. 28 rounded to the nearest 10 is 30. If I'm going to estimate by rounding this number to the nearest 1,000, I know that half of 1,000 is 500. So I have 1,000, and the next 1,000 is 2,000. 500 is the halfway point. Do I have more or less than that? I only have 98. That's much less than that, so I would estimate by rounding to 1,000. What if I were going to estimate by rounding this to the nearest whole? I have to figure out if 3/7 of an inch is more than half of my whole. Well, half of 7 would be 3.5. If I divide something into 7 parts, I would need 3.5 of those parts to be at the halfway point. I only have 3 of those parts, which is a little bit smaller than that half, not much, so rounding it to the nearest whole would be 1. If I'm going to round this to the nearest dollar, I want to be thinking, what is the halfway point of a dollar? Half of a dollar is 50 cents. So if I have more than 50 cents, I'd have to go up to the next dollar. Right now I have $48. If I had to round up, I'd go to $49. I only have 28 cents. That's less than half of a dollar, so I would round to $48. This number, if I want to round to the nearest tenth, I would think to myself, what number is in the tenths place? So my answer is going to be 7 8/10 or 7 9/10. Now I have to decide, is this number going to get me closer to this or to this? When I move from the tenths place to the hundredths place, I'm breaking each one of my tenths into 10 parts again, 10 smaller parts. So half of those 10 smaller parts would be 5. So if this number is more than 5 or more, then I would go closer to the 9. If it's less, I would be closer to the 8. So the halfway point is 5 of those parts. I'm closer to where I started. So my answer is 7 8/10. This is all about finding out what the halfway point is and then figuring out if what I have is less than or greater than that halfway point. Once we teach procedures in estimating and rounding, we often get to the point where we just tell students, look at the number next to it. Is it 5 or bigger? Then you round up. Is it not? Then you round down. And that's okay as long as students understand really what they're doing. For example, if they're rounding this number to the nearest dollar, they need to be thinking, well, my dollar ends here. Do I have more than half or less than half? But we don't want them to forget about the purpose of the math. What do you think should be taught to students about the purpose in estimating? And when they're actually estimating in the world, some things that they might have to consider other than just mathematical procedure. Here are just a few things I'd want students to be thinking about. One, what if I'm buying cookies for a couple of classes? If I have 53 students and I want them to each have one cookie, I need 53 cookies. What if they come in bags of 10? I might say, well, if I'm going to estimate by rounding to the nearest 10, I really would only need 5 bags of cookies because 3 is less than half of that bag of 10, and so I don't really need that. I don't need to round up. However, if I only buy 10 bags of cookies, that gives me only 50. And I would have 3 people in my classes who didn't get cookies and might be pretty unhappy. So there are times when even if mathematically the number is less than the halfway point, we still need to round up. It all depends on the purpose. If I'm in the store and I'm buying some things, and these are the prices of the things I'm buying, I might say, well, I'm just going to round to the nearest dollar and see how much I need. So half of a dollar is 50 cents. So here I round down, here I round down, here I round down. So if I add this all together, I only need $15. Now, if all I have with me in my pocket is $15, I might think, okay, I'm good to go. But the fact of the matter is, this is almost half of a dollar. And if I put these two together, I have almost another half a dollar. And if I get to the cash register, I'm not going to have enough. So I need to estimate differently than what math tells me sometimes, depending on my purpose. We need to make sure that students are thinking practically and logically, so they don't just get into a mathematical mindset where rules are followed without reason. We need to teach both methods of rounding and estimating. Mathematical, what that all means, the halfway point, closer to this, closer to that, but also what is the purpose of estimating in the world? How do we use it? And how might that differ from estimating just mathematically?